We've been in a series of sermons, Grace is Greater. We took a 2-week hiatus from that sermon, I guess is what you would call it. And so I've been thinking about this next sermon for quite a while, just to be honest with you. And that may or may not be good for you, that I've thought about it for like 3 weeks, the same sermon. So I'm not sure if you're going to be happy or not so happy after we get going here. But we are in Grace is Greater series. Remember the verse we're supposed to have memorized? No. Hebrews chapter 12, verse 15. Just the beginning part. Hebrews chapter 12, verse 15. See to it that no one falls short of the grace of God. See to it that no one falls short of the grace of God. That is what we're supposed to be reminding ourselves of constantly. See to it that no one falls short of the grace of God. And so today, we're going to look at how grace is greater than our circumstances. Grace is greater than my circumstances. Grace is greater than your circumstances. In fact, I love how Paul puts it in 1 Thessalonians chapter 5, verses 16 through 18. Paul says, always be joyful, never stop praying, and now listen to what he says, be thankful in all circumstances, for this is God's will for you who belong to Christ Jesus. Paul says, be thankful in all circumstances. This is God's will for you. Be thankful. That's hard to swallow. I mean, when I get a flat tire, are you telling me that I should be thankful? When my classmates are giving me a hard time for being a Christian, are you telling me that I should be thankful? When I run out of money 3 days before payday and all I have to eat is ramen noodles, are you telling me I should be thankful? Well, the truth is, yes, that's what I'm telling you. In fact, I'm not telling you, God's telling you that absolutely you should be thankful. If you have a flat tire, that means you have a car, and you should be thankful that you have a car. If you've been made fun of, that's because people are recognizing that you're living for Jesus, and you should be thankful that they notice your faith. If you've run out of money before payday, it means you have a job. You should be thankful you have a job, and thankful that there's at least ramen noodles to eat. We find ourselves in circumstances that are not to our liking. And we think to ourselves, if we could only change the circumstance, then we would be thankful. But the truth is, it's not about changing the circumstances. It's about changing our attitude. In fact, Paul says in another place, Philippians chapter 4, verse 4, in the NIV, he says, rejoice in the Lord always. I will say it again, rejoice. Rejoice in the Lord always. Listen, our author, Paul, who said, give thanks in all circumstances, and in Philippians 4 says, rejoice in the Lord always. These are the circumstances he lived in. He gives us a list of them. In 2 Corinthians chapter 11, verses 24 through 27, here's what Paul said. He said, 5 different times the Jewish leaders gave me 39 lashes. 3 times I was beaten with rods. Once I was stoned. 3 times I was shipwrecked. Once I spent a whole night and day adrift at sea. I have traveled on many long journeys. I have faced danger from rivers and from robbers. I have faced danger from my own people, the Jews, as well as from the Gentiles. I have faced danger in the cities, in the deserts, and on the seas. And I have faced danger from men who claim to be believers but are not. I have worked hard and long, endured many sleepless nights. I have been hungry and thirsty and often gone without food. I have shivered in the cold without even clothing to keep me warm. Listen, I don't know what your circumstances is, but I do know this. Paul is not calling for the impossible. Paul is calling for you and me to proclaim the truth just like him, and that is that grace is enough to get us through all circumstances. Grace is greater than any circumstance. Because when you realize what God has graciously showered you with, then you can trust God no matter what happens. When you recognize that what is in store for you and for me and for every Christian is thousands upon thousands of times greater than any struggle you could ever go through in this world, then you realize just how great grace is. 2 Corinthians chapter 4, verse 17 says it like this: "For our present troubles are small and won't last very long, yet they produce for us a glory that vastly outweighs them and will last forever." Grace allows us to see past the here and the now, past the immediate, and forward into the reward God has for us. But is that how you and I are responding? That's the question. Is that how you and I are responding? When tough circumstances come, do we live with confidence, trusting God? Do we rejoice in the fact that we have heaven in store for us? Or do we complain about what's going on in our lives and thereby miss out on the grace God has given us, lose sight of the grace God has given us? Philippians 2:14, do everything without complaining and arguing. We'll throw that one in. Do everything without complaining. I want you to understand that complaining steals away our trust in the Lord. It is an attitude that grabs hold of us and makes us lose sight of God's grace. It leads us farther and farther away from God. I want to tell you about a group of people. That group of people is called the Israelites. 2,000 or thousands of years ago, not 2,000, thousands of years ago, they lived in a place called Egypt. When they were in Egypt, they were slaves. These slaves called out to God, "Get us out of here, God. Help us." God comes to their rescue. He sends Moses in. Moses, by God's power, performs these 10 plagues. All of these Israelites witnessed these plagues. All of these plagues were proclaiming to the Egyptians, to the Israelite, our God is the one and only God. The gods you proclaim are nothing. He overcame all of their gods. He overcame their Pharaoh. In fact, he overcame nature itself. They have seen all this. They have walked through the Red Sea. They have watched the pillar of fire and of cloud lead them in the desert. And in Exodus chapter 16, verses 2 and 3, this is what it says. There too, the whole community of Israel complained about Moses and Aaron. If only the Lord had killed us back in Egypt, they moaned. There we sat around pots filled with meat and ate all the bread we wanted, but now you have brought us into this wilderness to starve us to death. Can you imagine looking back as the good old days, slavery? And that's what they're doing. They're looking back, oh, we were slaves. Woo, that was a great time. Remember how we had all that food to eat as slaves. Longing to go back to slavery. Wishing they were dead instead of being freed and being led by God Himself in the desert. Think about the life they wished for. They wished for a life where they were beaten. They wished for a life where they were told what they would do, when they would do it, how much of it they would do. They wished for a life that they would be killed if they didn't get enough work done. But because God is so gracious, He provided them bread from heaven. We know that bread as manna. Now, manna was interesting. It would be laid out before them every morning, and what did they have to do? They had to walk out there and pick it up. That's it. That's all they had to do. Walk out and pick it up. Each and every morning, God supplied their need. But are they satisfied? Absolutely not. No, Numbers 11, verses 4 through 6. It goes on. Then the foreign rabble who were traveling with the Israelites began to crave the good things of Egypt, and the people of Israel also began to complain. Oh, for some meat, they exclaimed. We remember the fish we used to eat for free in Egypt. And we had all the cucumbers, melons, leeks, onions, and garlic we wanted. But now our appetites are gone. All we ever see is this manna. Now, the free food that God has given them, that they don't even have to work for, is not enough. Now they want meat. And by the way, God graciously supplies that as well. 18 through 20, same chapter, it says this. And say to the people, purify yourself, for tomorrow you will have meat to eat. You were whining, and the Lord heard you when you cried. Oh, for some meat. We were better off in Egypt. Now the Lord will give you meat, and you will have it to eat. And it won't be for just a day or two, or for 5, or 10, or even 20. You will eat it for a whole month until you gag and are sick of it. For you have rejected the Lord who is here among you, and you have whined to him, saying, why did we ever leave Egypt? I don't know about you, but at least to me, Israel sounds a lot like us. Complaining and grumbling and whining when we are so very blessed. Constantly complaining and grumbling and whining. Journalist James Glassman declares that we live in a culture of complaint, and that it has infected America as a society. He goes on that we have grievances after grievance after grievance, and protest after protest, and we get upset about this and that and the other. In fact, we will sue a food company because they made us fat. And we will seek restitution or litigation against a bank because they lent us money when we were a bad credit risk. And we'll complain about overcrowded schools and low-paying jobs and cheap foreign labor. And he goes on to tell us that those complaints are completely unfounded, that we've been ignoring the blessings that offset all those complaints. In fact, he says that America and the way of life that we live is way higher than any other culture, any other country. In fact, this is what he writes. Is it fair for Americans with our rich infrastructure, our clean water, our incredible financial markets to compete against poor Indians who have to climb over sleeping beggars on their way to work? Who should be complaining here? According to his research, in 1955, the ratio of students to teachers was 30-1. Today, it's 19-1. Adjusted for inflation, compensation has tripled since 1947, and the cost of necessities have plummeted. In 1950, food would have taken up about a third of a family's total expenditures. Today, it only takes up about 1/7. The U.S. gross domestic product is more than the total of the next 5 countries combined. Americans work fewer hours, have more cars, cultural institutions, and children in college than ever before. The U.S. may jeopardize her prosperity if too many citizens demand and expect an easy road through life and complain about the smallest obstacles and the smallest setbacks. Let me ask you a question. When you look at your life, when you view the circumstances you are living in, what would make you thankful? I mean, really, if you've been complaining, what would make you thankful? What would it take for you to show gratitude for what you've been blessed with? They did a survey not too long ago, and they asked, what would make you thankful? How much money would it take for you to be thankful? And guess what? The person who made around $25,000 a year, guess what they thought it would take for them to be thankful? 50. Now, the person who made $50,000 a year, guess what it took for them to be thankful? 100. That's what they thought. 100. Now you kind of get the idea. The person with $100,000 a year made $100,000 a year. What do you think they thought it would take for them to be thankful? You're getting the picture here, right? Double. Look at the effect of complaining in our lives. First off, you need to understand this. Complaining is infectious. Just like the Israelites in the desert, when we grumble, it infects others. And they too begin to grumble. You are sitting here in worship today. You are excited and you are ready and comfortable and content. And all of a sudden someone says, well, it's too hot in here. Or it's too cold in here. Or someone said, hey, the music's way too loud, or the songs are way too slow. And all of a sudden, complaint starts to develop in your heart. It is too hot in here. It's ridiculously hot in here. I'm sweating, but I always sweat, so, don't. They sang the wrong songs this morning. It's infectious. If you complain, guess what? Others around you are going to catch the same bug and start complaining. That's how complaining works. Complaining is infectious. Complaining is invasive too. Once we start complaining, it gets in our heads and then we begin to look at everything with a critical eye. Everything. One complaint doesn't just end with one complaint. One complaint multiplies itself into many, many, many complaints. How many of you have ever heard of first world problems? Anybody ever heard of first world problems? First world problems are problems that we have because we're so blessed. They're not really problems, but we make them problems. In fact, you can go on the internet and you can search out first world problems, and it'll give you list after list after list of first world problems. I just made a note of a few of those. Here are some of those. My house is such a mess. There's stuff everywhere. My walk-in closet is not big enough. There's nothing to eat at home except an there's nothing to drink at home except an unlimited supply of fresh drinking water that comes out of this thing, the sink. You turn a knob and it's right there in your hand. I want food from the back of the fridge, but it's blocked by all the food in the front of the fridge. One pillow is too low, but two pillows is too high. I am so tired of eating out at all the restaurants near my home. My smartphone is too big for my pockets on my favorite pants. I don't like wallets because they're too heavy and bulky for my pants. I just bought a new pair of shoes, but I don't want to use them because they might get dirty. Just a few more. I can't sit comfortably because my wallet is just too fat. My charger cable isn't long enough to let me comfortably rest and use my phone. My house is so big that the Wi-Fi signal isn't super great in some of the rooms. My raisin bread has too many raisins in it. And then the last one is trying to find something I want to watch on Netflix, and there are just too many choices. I mean, come on. They should cut that down so I don't have to make such hard decisions. Complaining invades our life, and we start seeing even the blessings that God has given us as problems. It's infectious. It's invasive. And complaining is abrasive. The more I complain, the more others want to stay away from me and you. In fact, the church is supposed to be attracting people to Christ, but if we are complainers, then all we do is push them farther and farther and farther away. If you are going to complain about the sermon today when you're going out to eat after church, then I would encourage you to please call yourself some other church name. Just pick someone else and then complain. Because it will lead people far from the Lord. Jeffrey Collins shares a story. This is what he says. He says, it had been a trying week at our Love in Action office. At 5 o'clock on Friday, I was looking forward to having a quiet dinner with friends. Then the phone rang. Jeff, it's Jimmy. I heard a quivering voice say. Jimmy, who suffered from several AIDS-related illnesses, was one of our regular clients. I'm really sick, Jeff. I've got a fever. Please help me. I was angry. After a 60-hour work week, I didn't want to hear about Jimmy, but I promised to be right over. Still, during the drive, I complained to God about the inconvenience. The moment I walked in the door, I could smell the vomit. Jimmy was on the couch shivering and in distress. I wiped his forehead, then got a bucket of soapy water to clean up the mess. I managed to maintain a facade of concern, even though I was raging inside. Jimmy's friend Russ, who also has AIDS, came down the stairs, and the odor made Russ sick too. As I cleaned the carpet around Russ's chair, I was ready to explode inside, and then Russ startled me. I understand. What, Russ? Jimmy asked weakly. I understand who Jesus is, Russ said through tears. He's like Jeff. Weeping, I hugged Russ and prayed with him. And Jeff says this, God used me in spite of myself. What would have happened if Jeff and his inner complaints would have overflowed into his conversation? What would have happened if he'd have overflowed all these complaints around these two sick men who didn't know Jesus, but he was trying to demonstrate who Jesus was to them? What about when our complaints overflow into the world around us? Not only are we abrasive to others, but we are abrasive to God himself. Because I want you to think back to what I read just a moment ago. How did God respond to the Israelites' complaint about wanting meat? God said essentially, I'll give you meat until you choke on it. That's how he takes complaining. When we complain, we essentially are telling God, I don't trust you and your blessings aren't good enough for me. If you can start the day without caffeine, if you can get going without pep pills, if you can always be cheerful, ignoring aches and pains, if you can resist complaining and boring people with your troubles, if you can eat the same food every day and be grateful for it, if you can understand your loved ones are too busy to give you any time, if you can overlook it when those who you love take it out on you, even though it isn't your fault, if you can take criticism and blame without resentment, if you can ignore a friend's limited education and never correct him, if you can resist treating a rich friend better than a poor friend, if you can face the world without lies and deceit, if you can conquer tension without medical help, if you can relax without liquor, if you can sleep without the aid of drugs, if you can say honestly that deep in your heart you have no prejudice against creed, color, religion, or politics, then, my friend, you are almost as good as your dog. Do you know that Thanksgiving in the Bible is derived from two Greek words? It means good grace. That's what Thanksgiving means. You're looking at your New Testament, you see Thanksgiving, most of the time it is derived from two words, good grace. And essentially it means giving thanks is recognizing God's good grace regardless of circumstance. Maybe that's why God takes thankfulness so seriously. 2 Corinthians 2, 6 and 7. Now, just as you accepted Christ Jesus as your Lord, you must continue to follow him. Let your roots grow down into him, and let your lives be built on him. And then listen to what it says. Then your faith will grow strong in the truth you were taught, and you will overflow with thankfulness. The next chapter, verse 15 of Colossians. And let the peace that comes from Christ rule in your hearts, for as members of one body you are called to live in peace and always be thankful. 2 verses later, same chapter. And whatever you do or say, do it as a representative of the Lord Jesus, giving thanks through him to God the Father. And then Colossians 4 verse 2, devote yourselves to prayer with an alert mind and a thankful heart. These are just 4 verses about giving thanks, and they all show up in one short letter. Imagine if we look for thankfulness in the rest of the Bible. Maybe the best way we can sum things up this morning is found in Romans 8, verse 28. Romans 8:28, and we know that God causes everything to work together for the good of those who love God and are called according to His purpose for them. Do you believe that? Do you believe that God can work out everything for the good of those who are His and who are living according to the purpose He has called them to? Because if you do, then you're going to recognize that grace is greater than your circumstances, and complaining will no longer have a place in your life.